Good. Thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you, gentlemen, for being here up on stage with me. So I'm going to tee us off, just set the context here, and I think we heard quite a bit about that from Yngve and from Chris. Three points of context. Number one, the biggest opportunity, the biggest need for innovation, for investments that I think all of us have ever seen in our professional careers. I'm going to up Mr. Slyngstad here on the need. It's $9 trillion. If you look, you mentioned energy. We add to that logistics, you add to that mobility, you add to that the agricultural systems all across. You sum that up and you get $9 trillion required per year until 2050. So just an enormous challenge. This is driven by climate change. This is driven by technology development and innovation. Second point of context is that all industries, Yngve talked about that, all industries, all supply chains are going to get reconfigured in the coming years. We're going to see winners pulling ahead. The ones that differentiate, that innovate faster, they pull ahead. We're going to see the old champions needing to run faster and faster to stay in the game. Third point of context, and I would just pose to you that we are in the right place right now. Asia is the place to be. We hear lots of talk about looming recessions and so forth globally. But I would just point out a couple of things. Number one, Asia is going to be responsible for 50% of the increase in consumption from now until 2040. 50% increased consumption is here in Asia. I will point to you, today, even today, in today's market environments, Indonesia, India, Vietnam are all pulling north of 4.5% up to 7% growth in GDP in today's environment. China, we can debate their own public numbers, but yesterday Goldman Sachs suggested that the real growth in China is 3%, even today with their COVID zero policy. So Asia is the place to be, that I would pose to you. So that's the context of this panel. Now, I want to get Chung into the conversation. We haven't heard from you. So I'm going to ask you the most important question of all first, which is, who is your favorite Norwegian? And why?
It's going to be you, Oliver.
Thank you. Not rehearsed at all, of course. Listen, let's dig in. But I'm going to continue with you, Chung. I'm going to ask you a real question as well. If you look at the big picture, what are some of the most important opportunities that you see going forward?
Great, thanks. Yeah. As the National Trade Agency, Enterprise Singapore, we all know that 90% of trade is carried by seaborne transport, all right, or waterborne transport for that matter. So I would think that in order to move towards greening the supply chain or the greening of the overall end-to-end supply chain, maritime decarbonization is a key area that everybody has to pay attention to, all right? And I think you mentioned about the land-based logistics systems, the land transport, mobility, and so on. These are all part of it. As when we see end-to-end supply chain, we break it down, but maritime decarbonization is a big part of it. So in my view, as we move towards developing greener supply chain, as Singapore wants to be a global sustainable trade and connectivity hub, we certainly want to be a player, if not a major player, in the maritime decarbonization space. So that's one big area. And I also heard from the previous esteemed speakers that digitalization is synonymous with decarbonization. I fully agree. Because if we do not even have the data to tell us where we are now today, how are we going to get to the future where we want to be there? We don't even know. I mean, I'm not sure how many of the enterprises here actually track your current, whether it's a carbon footprint or your emissions and so on. I think, first of all, let's do that. So digitalization, to me, is the key enabler to do that. So to me, both maritime decarbonization and digitalization will be two anchors for the greening of the end-to-end supply chain.
Thank you. I want to go back to you, Yngve. You were talking about the big picture in your talk. As an investor, how do you look at the big opportunities? And let's also start zooming in on Asia specifically, if you don't mind.
So you know something, when there's going to be invested that much money, that an enormous amount of money will be lost, right? But there also will be enormous opportunities, because it is a combination of large volume and a lot of new things coming. So when we are putting up this asset management structure now, we are both hitting venture, the private equity side, but also the infrastructure side. So there's going to be a combination here of really large infrastructure projects. You know, the ocean winds that will be built by Aker and others, Keppel and so on, is very, very large installations. And I think you can come up with a very good investment proposal for large volume but relatively long return. On the other end, this is what the Innovation Conference is about. There's venture opportunities here, which is incredible. And it's very difficult to see how who's going to be the winners, and therefore sort of decide in advance where you're going to be. You have to have this open mind and be able to look at every moving part that's there. So I can't really give you the answer of exactly what is going to happen. I think the most important thing about this is that there is an enormous uncertainty. There's even an uncertainty about how the climate effect actually going to hit the economies. So we therefore kind of have to do all the time what investors are doing, looking at return relative to risk all the time.
Let me just pick up on that and get you into this conversation, Chris. He said, you know, it's difficult to see, you know, who are the winners? You're going to be one of those winners, correct? And
place your bet.
What and what are you betting on?
I think if we believe in a mix in terms of energy market, I think our bet will always be that is economical and where the investors are looking. So I think it has to be a hand-in-hand collaboration. First thing first is about economics. The world is facing an issue. You have an oil and gas with a very mature infrastructure, but you have renewables that is still a big question mark on where it's going to head. For us, I've mentioned, I think the very obvious one would be hydrogen supply chain and ammonia supply chain. Which would be the winner would be which was the one that we can innovate the fastest to bring down the cost and to be able to scale up the adoption. I think it will be between these two because of geographical limitation. Unfortunately, places like Singapore, it's not like Norway. We don't have oil fields, we don't have big winds, we don't have anything, but there will be a lot of interest in importing energy medium. So it has to be transportable.
And can I add on to that?
Please.
I think many of you know that Singapore is one of the world's top energy trading hubs. And we also have one of the top storage capabilities to trade energy. So I would say that if we were to move whether into a hydrogen world or the ammonia world or whatever fuel we want to move, we do not just think about from the user perspective. We also have to create that supply chain for the upstream and the midstream, which is how do you get the energy source to where the demand markets are. Now, Singapore succeeds because a lot of the demand markets are in Asia, so we are in a very best place to serve them, whether geographically or by reputation or whether by virtue of our financial hub status and so on. We are in the right place. So I also urge the ecosystem to really think about that. You know, it's not just about the infrastructure, but also not the hard infrastructure, but also the soft infrastructure, the midstream. How do we get the suppliers on board, the traders on board, so that everybody is in this together, and we work towards a common future. Yeah.
I think, Yngve, you wanted a remark.
Yeah, I think it's one thing for all the audience here who's from Singapore, kind of the action will be in Asia. It's the standard answer. And to a large extent, that is true. But I think one thing in terms of geography that you should pay attention to is the very simple fact that a country like Japan has an 88% import dependency. Europe, 60%. Now, a lot of the things is going to happen in public-private partnerships, and therefore those large economies who are very energy insecure needs to come up with frameworks for sponsorship. So I think a lot of innovation actually will happen in developed world where you have this possibility of getting large interventions by government to create incentives. So I think a lot of innovation actually will happen in places like Northern Europe. So for everyone in Singapore, I think we should encourage you just to follow what is the action there.
And you add Singapore to your list of, I think it's what, 99% import. So
Exactly,
exactly.
the same logic, because security of energy is so important here, right? And you're not going to be, market mechanism is not going to do it by itself.
Mr. Kastmann.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that, because I think essentially if you look at the region, the larger region essentially, and the need for energy, you look at countries like Malaysia and you look at countries like Indonesia, there are thousands of islands. We're looking at not on-grid solutions. These are going to need other kinds of solutions that are off-grid. Today, they are operating on diesel generators, and they need an alternative. What you could obviously look at, a lot of it is in an area where there isn't a lot of wind. Some of it, there will be wind. So you would have to look at alternative fuels. And one way to do it could obviously be to look at offshore solar. So I think we've talked about renewable energies. Offshore solar could be a solution, because there are three essential problems sort of facing these people living there. They don't have clean energy, they don't have gainful employment, and they don't have enough food. So they move into the slums of Jakarta and Manila, and that is a situation that is not something you want. So if you could provide them with maybe offshore solar facilities, and then you could also combine that with offshore aquaculture farms, you could possibly solve all those three problems. And that would be in a sort of a solution that would be good for the region. So that is just one addition that I want to put out there.
So when I listen to all of you, what I hear is that, listen, there's a massive investment need there, and there's a big sense of urgency. I also hear that we have a lot of the solutions, a lot of the thoughts are already here. But why are things not moving even quicker? What are the challenges that are getting in the way to make this practical? Chris.
Again, for me, it's down to commercializing all this at scale. One is about the need, and one is about the awareness. If we get too comfortable today about what we are burning, then industry will not take off. Policies do not equalize the cost per kilowatt from each of the different sources. So carbon taxes, which again leads back to digitalization, is very important. Once we create the visibility, we are able to at least equalize the playing field. Because the infrastructure right now is mature for fossil type of generation. Now for Asia in specific, they have different type of challenges, because in the third world, you probably will have to basically be able to get energy to progress, energy to pass, to survive. So we just have to bring down the cost of green energy and make it compelling to scale it. And the green hub concept is important, because then you will be able to create scale, and you are able to deliver that to different countries at speed.
Yngve, you wanted to follow?
Yeah, I think this is an innovation conference, right? I think it's important just to remind everyone that we do not have the technology for energy transition, because we're going to meet some barriers with the current technology. A very simple example is, of course, the lithium-ion batteries for electric cars. If you take all lithium you have, you probably can make 500 million of those. It's 1.5 billion cars. So you can, with the current technology, actually get the batteries in place. I think much more important, you're going to see all these areas like the electrical grid is, according to IEA, $21 trillion before 2050. Well, it's actually copper. It's not enough copper to do this. So we, with current technology, cannot implement because of the resources that is required. So there is a lot of new solutions that has to be created.
Got it.
I think we are driving a lot of innovation in Singapore. There are a lot of projects ongoing, many trials, sandboxes, as mentioned by MPACE as well. But I think one of the key areas that our companies are feeding back to us is also about regulatory and compliance. Many of the areas that we are going into has no historical precedent. Either that, or there are some previous misconception baggage. So I think the regulators and the compliance agencies also need time to fully assess the risk, the security, the safety, the health, and so on. So it's also us working together to educate each other, in doing this. I mean, some of our law, I don't know about in Norway, but some of our laws in Singapore could be very legacy laws. That means before even the business model or even the tech was in place, ages ago, who dares to think about a Grab thing, or a Uber thing, right? That's a simple model that all of us know. But actually, 20, 30 years ago, who ever dreamt about that, right? And how do you regulate that now? You have your taxis, and so on and so on. So I think the regulatory and the compliance part is also important. While we can create a lot of sandboxes and all this, but you still need time in order to scale up, because your question is about scaling, adoption, So I think that's also an important part that we have to work together to pay attention to.
So, and I think you're starting now to get into the topic of collaboration, and I think this is one of your very important drivers and priorities, Paul. So tell us a little bit about how does collaboration work? What do we need to see on the collaboration front?
Well, I think that essentially, I think Chris mentioned it, I think also Yngve mentioned it, that the point of shared responsibility and partnership between government and industry is obviously quite key. Ming is also mentioning, and I would say that Norway and Singapore are fairly successful in that regard as two countries. In Norway, for instance, the transition to clean maritime fuel wouldn't have happened without the active involvement of the government. Active procurement process is saying that we need clean solutions. We don't care what they are. That's up for the industry to choose. But the ferries, in this case, for instance, should have clean fuel. So I think there are a lot of good initiatives on both sides. However, there is no need to reinvent the wheel. We are having a lot of activities in Norway, for instance, on ammonia and within electrification and also within hydrogen. And Singapore is also very ambitious in this area. This is fantastic. It's an area for us to collaborate. But I think we have to sit down on a platform, bilateral one, to share essentially what projects are going on both sides, see how we can possibly pool resources and work on complementarity. I think that would be one very concrete step of doing it. And one place and platform to do it could be Singapore Maritime Week in this particular case, or Nord Shipping in the case of Norway, when there are big delegations going both ways. Sit down, I mean, the challenges are universal. We could sit down, share what we're doing on both sides, possibly set up working groups to address universal problems, statements, and then possibly we could pool our funding to get innovation projects up and running where we address the problem statements that we know are there.
So better platforms for sharing.
Yeah, a structured platform, and that we meet on a regular basis.
Chris, as a private sector player, how do you think about collaboration?
I think in any collaboration is always win-win, especially in trying to innovate. As a commercial enterprise, there's always about, at the end of the day, financing and the ability to generate returns. Now, it also takes a lot of foresight in investing in what we think that will make a difference. So the key thing about collaboration today in this so uncertain world where we don't know who will be the winner or what is the winning product, I think the exchange of what we are doing at a sandbox per se on both Norway and Singapore is important. And we should open our mindset, open our mind that there is a possibility to collaborate at a lot of different levels. Meaning to say, government level or even all the way down to supplier level into Singapore product or vice versa, that ultimately create a winner. So it's not just about enterprise to enterprise of similar know-how. In Norway, you're very entrepreneurship and very technically, there's a lot of foresight. That's traditionally how we collaborate. For us, we bring certainty and also maybe even financing, financial services. So actually, it's beyond the industry. To find a new solution, we need to bring together all the different horizontals and look at opportunities to end up with a solution to the energy sustainability.
Maybe I share a real case study that we just did. If you have read Straits Times today, page 2 today will announce that we just launched our first design, engineered, and built in Singapore electric bus. That project was done by my team at Enterprise Singapore, and we are very proud of that. That is a project with a Scandinavia company. Unfortunately, it's not Norway, but it's Sweden.
We don't know them.
Yeah, so...
Not heard of this country that you speak of.
That's why I like you, my favorite Norwegian. So basically, right, it was with Volvo Bus, right? One of the top manufacturer of buses in the world. So we did a match between Volvo Bus and SC Auto, a very growth and very strategic focus Singapore SME. And through coming together, they actually delivered what I call the build in Singapore, first build in Singapore electric bus in less than 12 months. In fact, only 9 months. And the matching and the complementary partnership is really interesting. So Volvo Bus realized that in order to scale in Asia, in particular Southeast Asia, they need a very strong local partner who has the engineering, the local context, and know how to navigate the very complex marketplaces in Asia. And SC Auto, at today's stage of development, is unable to have their own proprietary technology in the chassis and the powertrain. So they came together. So SC Auto will build everything except the chassis and the powertrain. And together they come and delivered this first in Singapore electric bus. And now we are going to bid for the tenders in Singapore and in all the regional countries. And it's a huge market. And I want to extrapolate this example to how we can work with Norway as well. I mean, in Enterprise Singapore, we are very open about collaboration. Exactly like what Paul says, I think there's some information gap nowadays. We need to get our platforms together. So just like what MPSC have shared about what we are doing at the maritime space, I'm also happy to share that we have also started partnership with key partners like PSA, Quark Maritime Group, and so on. And we have launched partnership programs with them. But we welcome Norwegian companies, technologies, to work with us as well. Because we don't have the full answers to everything. We don't have the full tech stack. So we need that kind of support and partnership from you. And I think that's where I think we can come together. Yeah.
I think Paul, you wanted to comment on this.
Yeah, I think what we did last year was we did a trial. So the Maritime and Port Authority, they run this maritime innovation process each year. And what we did was that we invited in all the Norwegian maritime players for a session like that, presenting problem statements that they are facing, then discussing it in groups, and then connecting solvers to those problem statement owners, if you like. I think this is something we can expand on. And then possibly we can look at existing bags of money that we both have, and to see if we could have joint co-innovation calls where we actually put money into trying to solve these problem statements. That is something that we are happy to explore, and I think we've started to discuss a bit about. So that is, I guess, next steps for us.
Wonderful. Listen, I'm looking at the time, so we're going to start wrapping up. And what I would like to do here is ask each of you the same question, and short 1-2 sentence answer. We have a room full of executives, of investors from Singapore and from Norway. If you're in their shoes, what is your advice or your ask of them? That's what I would like. I'll give you 10 seconds to think about it, and then we'll start there and go this way. Oh, you handed away your microphone quickly? There you go. You want to go first, Chris? Go.
I will start. I think that the key thing and the common theme is make use of the existing platform. I think that if we are not already using for the collaboration between Singapore and Norway, I don't think there will be another platform that's better. Because there's a long collaboration between the two countries, technologies have been exchanged and growth has been created. I think for the unknown future on energy sustainability, make use of the existing platform that's already there, improve on it, jump on board. I think that there will be a lot of collaborators.
Totally agree. So I'll just have 3 words: collaboration, sharing, and partnership, not just in business models, tech, but also in data. So I like the part where we talk about, we have all gone through the sandboxes and a lot of trials and pilots, but how do we really share that kind of experiences and the data that we have collected? I think that would be very important in helping us solve common problems. Thank you.
So I think from the investment point of side, even the world is uncertain, you like to have an open mind for all possibilities. So take the first step into many different technologies, et cetera. When you are quite confident, scale fast.
Well, I think pretty much what I wanted to say has been mentioned already. I think partnerships, I think would be important because you can't do it alone. That is as simple as that. We need consensus.
Thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, innovate. Number 2, get on with it. Pace matters. And number 3, collaborate. That's what I take away. Please give a massive hand to the fantastic panel.